So thank you very much, Dr. Hammond and colleagues behind me and everybody in the audience. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's really a pleasure and honor to be here tonight and to say a few words. I'm going to be very brief because I think it's more important that we give an opportunity to all the colleagues behind me and the audience to interact and to see where we go and to see how we can take this forward. I was asked to say a few words about the legal foundations for self-determination and independence. Now, interesting enough, the concept of self-determination is a controversial one in the sense that everybody knows internationally about self-determination, but the problem is that it's being interpreted sometimes quite often in a political manner by whom they would like to interpret it either in this way or in that way. And that makes it very difficult. And if you look at the developments with regard to self-determination over time, and there's a lot of studies being done over the concept, you'll find in international law the basic things, and I know colleagues behind me and everybody is quite familiar with those kind of things. I'm just going to refer to 3 or 4 of them. You'll find the provisions of the United Nations Charter. We all know Article 1.2 of that Charter. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights referred to this situation. International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights. The Declaration of Independence to colonial countries and peoples. Customary international law. Those are the kind of instruments, and there are others, where they are specifically referred to the whole idea of self-determination. The problem is that when you look into self-determination as a concept, the focus originally was very much on the decolonization process, where you've had in history all the colonies and they had to become decolonized and to be led to independence, and that was where self-determination was used. That phase came to an end at some stage when that whole colonial process came to an end and we saw the decolonization of all the different colonies. And then there was a new kind of emphasis which started basically off in the 1990s when the world, after the end of the Cold War, basically started to look in a different way to the reality of states. Because in the past, you'll remember, we had a question of truly nation states, where a state consisted basically of people from the same cultural group, the same ethnic group, the same language group in one homogeneous state, and they were given self-determination. But after the end of the Cold War, and people started to look in a different fashion to international developments and how countries operated, you suddenly found that within those states, there are suddenly other groups and other boundaries being drawn because of the breaking up of the Soviet Union, and that whole process went further, and then also in Africa, people started to question boundaries. And you started to get the question, but how about different minorities within geographical areas? What about their right to self-determination? And that started a whole new discussion, a whole new conflict in terms of how do we address that kind of thing. And obviously, you then suddenly had a huge dilemma between states who say our internal integrity, our geographical integrity should not be touched, we should be entitled to do our own thing, etc., etc. So that was a very difficult situation, and on the other hand, you found that groups said, but we as a group, or as an ethnic group, or as a minority, we are also entitled to the right to self-determination. And you had to find a balance between those differing views and those differing forces. Now what normally happens is, and it's always the same, you don't find national governments who say we are very much in favor of self-determination and want to give this to different ethnic groups and minorities. National governments in the rule say, no, we don't recognize you, we don't want you to have that, we are all just this or that, and they try to combine and keep the state that they've inherited or that they are governing over as an entity. And it's always the minorities or the ethnic groups or the other different mutations there that says, no, but we want to take our own decisions. And then quite often those requests or those strive for those kind of things are quite severely restricted or resisted by a national government, until you come to a point where they can no longer resist that. And what quite often then happens is they say, okay, fine, if you really want this, let's see what compromise we can find. You can have more say with regard to this or that aspect of your life. And what quite often happens then, they've waited too long, and people say, no, we may have settled for that 10 years ago, but we've now moved beyond that point. Now we will not be happy with anything but total freedom, total self-determination, total the right to take our own decisions. We don't want to be part of what you're trying to offer us. And we've seen numerous examples in the world that exactly where that played out. I just want to refer quickly to the specific South African situation. South Africa, and there's the famous philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, who basically said, we must live towards the future, but while doing that, we must look in terms of what happened in the past and learn the lessons of the past. And South Africa as an entity is a specific artificial creation that happened in 1910. We all know the history. In 1910, we became a union with an artificial colonial boundary that told us we are all South Africans. And sometimes, yes, South Africans, what does that exactly mean? Even the name of the country is a geographical indication. Where in Africa? No, South Africa. I was once asked by an American journalist, now tell me how many people in South Africa speak the language South African? And I said, no, there's no such language. That's why we've got a very diverse society with 11 official languages. So, throughout, since 1910, we've had this artificial construction. And there was always strife and different power struggles within the South African Union, which became a republic, etc., etc. When the ANC came to power in 1994 and the current constitution was negotiated, and you'll note that I'll talk about the current constitution. Some people will refer to the final constitution. There's no such thing as a final constitution. It's only the current constitution, because all constitutions can be amended. And this one will also be amended in time. There's no doubt that it has been amended. It's the current constitution. When this constitution came into being, that was once again, the emphasis was on one South Africa, one citizenship, and everybody is forced to be part and parcel of this one united South Africa. And it's enshrined in the constitution, in section 1, in the founding provisions, one united South Africa, to make sure that nobody could get out. In those days, we were in negotiations with the ANC and trying to get things done in a different direction. But what we wanted to achieve in terms of self-determination was exactly the opposite of where the notion was moving towards, this one united, happy South Africa. Any reference to recognition of self-determination or the recognition of minorities or different communities was against the tide at that stage. Everything was moving in a different direction. That made it possible for us to negotiate Clause 235 in the Constitution, which is very unique. It makes provision for self-determination, but that was the furthest we could go at the time under the circumstances, because you had to negotiate with the ANC and the National Party, and that stage the National Party was also not supporting this. At that stage they've already surrendered to the ANC. So it was very difficult to get something there, but we at least succeeded in keeping the door open. And I know very well, in terms of what the provisions of Section 235 says, entitled to self-determination, etc., within the Republic, because the ANC still wants you to be part of the Republic. And we'll get to that point when the time comes, and we will deal with that challenge when the time comes. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at South Africa at the moment, it's always very difficult, and specifically now the whole idea, the whole movement for Cape independence. Many of our fellow South Africans in the north of the country do not understand what we are doing, and they don't understand why we are saying these things. But on the other hand, in some instances it's basic ignorance. In other instances, they are scared. But if we succeed, what's going to happen to them? What will happen to, how will they survive? But they are not capable of understanding what needs to be done in terms of creating a future. And we can talk about these things. We will be talking about them tonight. But if you think that you as a minority, whatever minority, be that ethnic, be that linguistic, be that religious, if you think you're going to survive in this continent of Africa without having land under your feet, you will not succeed. You will definitely not succeed, because as long as you don't have independence, as long as you don't have freedom and full self-determination, you will always be at the mercy of some majority out there. And there are beautiful examples in the Bible. For example, where it said it went not too badly and things went well, and there was a relationship between the Israelites and the king, and then a new king came and everything changed, because there's no guarantee. As long as you try to live because of the mercy of somebody else and you can't take your own decisions, which means self-determination, you will always be a victim of a problem, and you will not survive. So these are kind of things. I think the whole idea of self-determination is on the table. The processes are on the table, but we must understand. I didn't go in all the details in terms of secession and what can be done in that regard. But to get to self-determination and independence internationally is not a magical, quick fix thing that can just happen suddenly overnight. It can happen depending on the circumstances. And that is why the current election coming up is also going to be vital in terms of how it will affect the developments for self-determination and independence in the Western Cape. Nobody knows what kind of scenario is going to play out after the election. Anything is possible. I guess we'll get to that later tonight. But in the meantime, the final reality is that it's up to the inhabitants, the electorate in this instance, but in a geographical area, the people, the inhabitants. Nobody could be more interested in the future than they should be in their own future. Because you can be a group that say, we want to do this, that, and the other. But if the people don't want that, you will not succeed to attain that. The challenge is to get the message across, to get people active in this, to get people motivated in this, and it takes time. We all know. Some of us have been involved in this, some longer than others, but it takes time to get people to understand the reality and to get them moving forward. But I think at the moment, everywhere in South Africa, people are talking about Cape independence. It has become a reality. It's something that cannot be ignored. Some people wanted to ignore it in the past, some people wanted to ridicule it, but it's now becoming a reality that needs to be dealt with, and we've got an opportunity in the election to also prove support for the idea so that it will become more and more relevant until we can finally implement it. I just wanted to give that short introduction.
Des, do you want to go next?
Thank you, Dr. Hammond. I'm the only non-politician here. So I'm from CapeXit. I'm one of 3 directors of CapeXit. CapeXit is not a political party. We registered CapeXit 31st of January 2018. We were 5 members in the organization. Today we've got just over 840,000 members. We've got a Facebook presence of about 127,000 people. Totally a civic organization, one goal: to establish the de facto support for independence on the ground. So we're rolling out awarenesses, we're making it known out there that independence is totally achievable. So that's what CapeXit's aim is.
Thank you, Des. Jack Miller of Cape Independence Party.
Are we just going to introduce ourselves, or should we get into any topics? Or
I think just introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Hi there, my name is Jack Miller. I'm the founder of the Cape Independence Party. We were founded in 2007, 17 years ago, and we're in the middle of a fierce election battle. So I think it's perhaps pertinent to talk about where things stand. For 17 years, we've been contesting elections on the principle of Cape independence. And every single election we've been allowed to contest without any issues. We currently hold 2 seats in government in the City of Cape Town municipality. But we are currently at the Supreme Court to try and fight for our right to be on the Western Cape provincial ballot. I think we've got a very strong case. But this is, like Corne was talking about the legal system in South Africa, and there can be different interpretations or different degrees of self-determination that governments will be willing to allow their citizens to pursue. Well, similarly so, here in South Africa, we need to make sure that the principles of democracy and your right to vote for Cape independence are not taken away from you. And as Corne said too, if you get a new king in power that has a different perspective than you do in your community, life can change, and quite drastically for the worse. So I want to add that we're very fortunate that we've had 17 years in which we can offer people the right to vote for Cape independence. But it's up to you as the voters to not take that right for granted, because you might not always have that right. And if it's gone, then what? So all of us here, we believe very strongly in Cape independence, and we've been fighting for it for many, many years, and we hope that you as voters and active citizens, taxpayers, ratepayers, community members, that you help us and join us in this journey of rescuing our beautiful, beloved home, the Cape of Good Hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack. And then we've got Robert King, Referendum Party.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hammond, and thank you to all my panellists and the audience tonight. I'm Robert King. I'm a co-founder and candidate for the Referendum Party in the upcoming elections. I think we're probably the only political party on this panel that never actually wanted to be a political party. We were forced to become a political party rather than choosing to be one. And the reason for that is before the Referendum Party there was the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, and we were involved heavily in negotiations with the DA and other political players in the Western Cape to try and find new ways to find autonomy for the province and to protect our future. And one of the developments that came from those negotiations was we got an agreement from the DA that they would actually call a referendum. John Steenhuisen himself said he would call a referendum on Cape independence. And as soon as he said that, the betrayal and the backtracking on what they said began. And by October of last year, we got formal written confirmation from Alan Windey that he would not call a referendum. He didn't want to call one. It was against his wishes. He didn't really care what the Western Cape people had to say. It was what his wishes were supreme. So that led us to creating the Referendum Party so that we could give especially DA voters the choice to vote for Cape independence. Many people in the Western Cape actually like the DA to a large degree, but they still support Cape independence, and they're worried that a vote for Cape independence might dislodge the DA from power. So what we've come out with is 3 simple policies when it comes to our party. We'll keep the ANC and EFF out of the Western Cape. We'll ensure that the DA still forms the government in the province, but critically we have to remove their majority so that they're forced into coalition with a pro-independence party, and from that we can use our leverage to get a referendum. So that's the point of the Referendum Party. We're not politicians, none of us really come from a political background. We're campaigners who just truly believe in the potential of the Western Cape and want to build a bright first world future for this province. So that's what the Referendum Party is all about.
Thank you. Over to audience. If you want to ask some questions, please give our panel a chance to field. Doesn't matter how difficult the questions are, people who are all ready and willing to tackle whatever questions you've got. Who would like to answer that?
I will try, and then the colleagues will add. The reality is, at the moment, let me just go one step back. The problem facing the Cape Independence Party at the moment, there was no problem in the past for parties to participate in the election. And then some individuals started tampering with the electoral system by going for this narrative that says independence will be better representing the will of the people than political parties. I do not agree with that. So we say to them, don't tamper with the electoral system, because a ruling party will never change the electoral system to their own detriment. They will misuse the opportunity, and that's exactly what's playing out now. So that's just the first point. So secondly, if you look at the Western Cape, and that is our focus, all of our focus, the current ruling party is the Democratic Alliance. They've got 24 seats out of a total of 42, and they govern. The DA is currently in different coalitions with different parties. They are in coalitions with the Freedom Front Plus in a number of councils in the Western Cape and 11. But without hesitation, I'm telling you, the DA is not a happy coalition partner. They do not want to be in coalitions. If they prefer to be on their own, if they can do that, they will not govern with anybody else. But that does not mean we should assist and allow them. So if you talk about numbers, the ideal first prize would be if the majority of the electorate in the Western Cape vote for pro-independence political parties, and we can form a government on our own. That would be the first prize. But obviously the DA is at the moment coming with a campaign that says everything is perfect in the Western Cape, don't rock the boat, just vote for the DA. And we all know, well, with all due respect, I'm a bit naughty when I say that. The DA will say, but we govern better than the ANC. And I would say, I agree, but how difficult could that be? So the reality is that the first prize would be if we could take the government as coalition parties that are pro-independence. But let's say if that doesn't happen. The one thing that I don't want to happen is that the DA continue to govern alone, because they are not pro-independence. They are not prepared to give a referendum. As a matter of fact, I think the difference is the following. The DA says no, we don't support Cape independence. because we want, that's now the DA, we want to export their perception of the excellence of their governance to the rest of South Africa. That's their project. We are saying to them, no, you're going to import the failures of the rest into the Western Cape, unless we go the independence route. And we'll see that playing out at the moment. So what I would like to see from Freedom Front Plus's point of view, I want the DA into a coalition. I want to get them below 50% and then force them to form a coalition with the pro-independence parties.
So I think to ask you numbers.
Sure.
How many voters are there? How many votes do we need for?
Well, the problem is this, and I know Des will answer on that score. They've been busy with the process for quite a while to get the majority of the voters to support Cape independence, and that will basically strengthen the hand for calling for a referendum. Now, if I'm not mistaken, there's about 2.7 million voters in the Western Cape, registered voters. Half of that will take you to what? 1.5. So that would strengthen the hand to say, but these group of people are feeling strongly about that. But the problem is when you go into the election now, it's not a referendum. It's an election between political parties and people will vote for different issues. And that's why everybody says we want a referendum. Again, there's...
So Des, do you want to add to it? How many votes do we need to achieve Cape independence?
Our perspective, when you look at our website, we rounded it off to 1.6 million. We're saying 1.6 million represents 50% plus 1 of the registered voters of the Western Cape. Now, according to international requirements, there are certain boxes you must tick. So we tick all the boxes, the common history, geographical area, all of that. And the one box we ticked, perhaps jumping the gun a little bit, was last year October when we handed over, together with CIAG, a memorandum on the 3rd of October, and Alan Winde politely said on the 10th of October, I will not call a referendum. So that was one of the local remedies you had to exhaust. You have to ask him, and we all knew that he was going to say no. So our focus, standing at 840,000, is now swinging over to the international side. And we're watching this coming election with a kind of a great anticipation, because we need to see who's going to jump into whose bed and take his duvet with and steal a pillowcase or whatever. It's going to happen. There's going to be a lot of negativity, mudslinging, especially from our, and I spoke last time, I talked about our beloved friends in the Ivory Tower here. We don't trust them at any minute of any day. But we need to see how those dynamics will play out to put it all back in perspective again. And then we've got great partners that we're going to sign an accord with, and then take the thing on the international route. And should we totally fail getting a referendum locally, you've got to start looking at the people's referendum as an option, which is going to be expensive, but it's an option. It's been done before. Whatever we are aiming to achieve is not reinventing the wheel. It's been done before. We're following a kind of a beaten track.
Anything you want to add?
Absolutely. I've got lots to add. It's a question that I love asking audiences, because Cape independence and our referendum is not a single objective target. It can take many different shapes and forms. So what blows my mind every election is how disconnected voters are with the practical reality of politics in not just South Africa but the Western Cape. So I'd like to engage with the audience here and just ask you guys what you recall as being the election results in the last two elections. So let's go to 2019, the very last Western Cape provincial elections we had. Does anyone know what the DA got in the 2019 Western Cape elections? No checking on your Google phones, yeah? The DA got 60%, an unassailable majority. What do you think the ANC got? The ANC got 33% and the EFF got 2%. Together, the ANC and EFF got 35%. Nowhere near. The DA will beat the drum for for months and months as we lead up into the election. And trust me, the 7 days before the election, you're going to get 10 SMSs, 100 emails, 50 phone calls. You're going to pass all the polls on the telephone polls saying that if you do not vote for the DA, it's too close to call, the ANC is going to get in, you have to vote DA to keep the ANC out. The facts on the ground are the complete opposite of that. Let's move to 2021. 70% of the Western Cape population lives in the city of Cape Town. Guess what the ANC and the EFF got in 2021? The ANC got 18%. 18%. The EFF got 4%. Together, the two biggest boogeymen in this country got 22%. I mean, that is, when we got our 2 seats in the city of Cape Town, when I gave my opening speech there, I congratulated the ANC. I said, welcome and joining us as being a small party. And everyone laughed. But it's the truth. 18% for the ruling government. 18%. The EFF, Julius Malema, 2%. These people are not a factor in the Western Cape. So as soon as voters in the Western Cape realize this, when the DA says you have to vote for us to keep the ANC out, you can tell them you're lying. You're absolutely lying. The problem in South Africa is an unassailable ANC dictatorship. The problem in the Western Cape is a DA unassailable dictatorship. Now, if we want Cape independence or greater self-determination, the single only stumbling block to achieving that is not the ANC, it's not the EFF, it is the DA and Helen Zille and Alan Winde and all of those DA leadership who refuse to give you a referendum. They refuse to simply ask you what you feel you would like for the home that you live in. The DA is your problem, and that's the solution we need to break through if you want a referendum on Cape independence. So to answer your question, what's the number? The actual number, the number can change. If the DA is up at 60%, it's hopeless. If the DA is at 59%, the number is 1%. You know, how many votes do we collectively get to fill that 1%? If the DA is at 55%, the target is 5.1%. So it changes according to where the DA polls.
So I would just add that, so it's really a two-step question almost, how many votes do you need for Cape independence? The simple one is the referendum itself. With any referendum, you need to get 50% of the vote plus 1. But how do you get the referendum in the first place? And there was a really interesting study by Harvard University which found that if 3.5% of the population gets actively involved in a political campaign, then very rarely, if at all, does that campaign not succeed. So we already know that 840,000 people support CapeXit. They've signed their mandate. They've given it to CapeXit. We also know from polling that the CIG has done that 58% of people in the Western Cape want Cape independence, and 68% of people want a referendum. They want the right to have their say. So, and of that 68%, 79% of DA voters want a referendum. So it's overwhelmingly popular among the voters of the DA. There's a massive disconnect there between the party leadership and their voters. Now, if you base this on the last election results, 3.5% of the overall voting population is equivalent to about 100,000 people. And it so happens to be that if the DA were to lose 100,000 votes, if 100,000 votes were to move from the DA to pro-independence, pro-referendum parties, then the DA would be forced into a minority position, and they would be forced into a coalition with one of the parties on this panel. So that's how, for a number, that's more or less what it is. We need about 100,000 people who used to vote for the DA to now change their vote over to a pro-independence party. And I'm pretty sure it's the case with all these parties. We're always going to make sure that the DA is going to be there instead of the ANC. We're never going to support an ANC premier in the Western Cape. But it's a question about protecting your present and protecting your future. And if you want to protect your future, the only way you can do that is through a referendum on Cape independence.
I think that's a thorough, comprehensive answer to that question. Next question.
So forgive my ignorance, I'm from Durban. I've just come to the Cape. Obviously I've come here because Durban's gone down the tubes now. You can't even have a decent business there anymore with the way things are going. why is it then so difficult to get the referendum, besides just what you guys have said now? I mean, what is it that's holding the Cape back? Is it the people? Is it the voters? Is it too many parties, not people pulling in the same direction? Why? Why? Because I mean, what you guys say makes it sound so easy. Then where's all the stumbling blocks? What's going on here?
Two letters, D and A.
You can add another two, D, A and C. But right, another question? Yes.
I'm a member of the ULA, United Marxist group that we also have an independence movement, but we're on the apolitical side. We say you can't fix the system from within the system, referendum. So we have a website called freethecape.org, and we have signed the mandate, all the legal requirements that were presented at the UN. I think most of you have had dealings with some of the people in there. Our current leader is Aro Basson. He's also the head of the tribal groups of the indigenous tribal groups of the Western Cape. So we're at 1.4 million people have signed the mandate. Now, that doesn't mean it's 1.4 excluding because I happen to have given my vote to all of you as well, so there's duplication there. But I don't think we're far off. But their number they were talking about was at 2 million that were required, according to the international, according to the census that was done in 2011. I think it was the census before this one, 2013 or 2011. According to that census, we needed 2 million people to sign the mandate, and then we could demand a referendum from the ANC government. They had no right to refuse it according to the international law. All of this stuff is contained in that website and all the legal arguments and stuff, but surely it's time that the independent movements work together. I just can't see how it will ever happen from within a political system.
Well, let me ask Des to reply to that first, because you try to work on non-political solution too, and you're familiar with the ULA and what they stand for. How do you respond to this?
The fact of the matter is that Sean from United Cape States took over all documentation from ULA. And Elroy is on the exco of United Cape States. United Cape States has got a certain geographical area which, first of all, we don't agree with, but even if we agree with the area, they also say they need 2 million people in support. Their definition of the word people, which comes up in international law, they define their concept of people as being Kaaplanders. It's a very difficult definition to fly internationally, because if I ask the guy at the United Nations, do you know any Kaaplanders, he's, like Dr. Corne said, he's going to ask him if he's speaking South Africa. We don't find enough definition in what's there. And I'm going to throw this rock out there. We've asked repeatedly, and I know Hein personally. I think all of us here knows Hein personally. I've asked repeatedly to please just put on the table the 97% of the legal process has been completed. And my question to Sean was, please share with me which was the highest international body that recognized your legal process and approved it. And his answer was no one. So to me, it's a white paper, it's a document sitting on the table, and the claim to 1.4 million, you're absolutely right, there's repetition. If I have 10 groups and each group has got 10 people, I don't have 100 people, I've got 10 people. So there's a lot of vague areas, and we're in discussions with Sean. We met not too long ago, we met with Sean and Patrick Malley. I think they've got a way to go in terms of defining where they want to be and where they want to go. And I'll tell you another honest point I'll share with you. CapeXit keep on talking about association. You've got to be cautious who you associate with to give your movement impetus. There are certain groups in this country which you do not associate with. I'm going to leave it there.
I understand.
Otherwise I'm going to tell you family secrets.
Rob, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I'll just add something. Look, obviously I'm coming from the political side of things, but I can understand, why people, would feel disenchanted with being able to change things through the political system. I mean, after all, for the last 30 years in the Western Cape, we've voted one way, the rest of the South Africa's voted the other way, and they've always gotten what they want, we've never gotten what we want. So I can understand why people would feel disenchanted with that system. But we do have tools at our disposal, which we can use to get a referendum. I mean, one of the things that are at our disposal is in the South African constitutions and the Western Cape Constitution, the Premier has a right to call a referendum. So you only need to influence one person, basically, and that is the Premier of the Western Cape. And we have our own government in the Western Cape. It's very limited in the powers that it has. But it's still something that we as the people of the Western Cape have power over through our ballots. So we don't need to, I know it would be great if we can get 51% of the vote, but if we're being realistic, we don't need to win a majority. We just need to put the pressure on them so it's so great that they can do nothing else but call a referendum on Cape independence. So the political route is there. You don't need an astronomical amount of votes to actually achieve it. It's 100,000 votes plus the votes we've already got, and we can actually get the referendum through that process. And I know, campaign and civil society groups like CapeXit will play a massive role in pushing us in that direction.
Any other questions for
I have a question. Why don't the 800,000 people supposedly wanting independence vote for the Cape Independence Party?
The answer is fairly simple. We do not prescribe to people who to vote for. We cannot say we're not political. What we do tell people is go and research all the parties that stand for independence, and you make the choice. I cannot say I'm not political and I'm neutral and I say go and vote for A, B and C. We are moving to the point where we are putting out an accord with the independence parties and saying these are the parties, so we don't vote for the ANC, the EFF or the other 27 or 28 parties that's going to be there. We define who the parties are, but the ultimate choice will always be that of the voter. We can't influence a vote.
I think CapeXit from the beginning.
In business for 17 years.
Yeah, this is what's so sort of heartbreaking about it is that, and for 17 years we've been speaking to people who majority are DA voters, and we've said, do you not see the trajectory of the country? Can you not see where we're going to be in 10, 15, 20 years time? And everyone knows that we're becoming another Zimbabwe, but to get that part of the brain connecting with this part of the brain to go, this election, when I get that SMS from the DA, which tells me if I don't vote DA, the ANC is going to get in, it's just the fear of the ANC and the marketing of the DA is so powerful and so effective that the electorate makes decisions which frankly have sown the seeds for their grandchildren's and great-grandchildren's future without understanding the implications, the long-term implications of their votes. And so it's obviously something that that has been a great, we wish that more people in the Cape would have voted for Cape independence, and we hope that moving into the future that people do realize as the writing on the wall becomes clearer and clearer that if we don't vote for Cape independence, we're going to end up with a ANC, EFF, potential coalition of South Africa, and we all know what that's going to look like. So voters vote for many different reasons, and it just seems that the DA has managed to capture the fears of voters and issues that voters value perhaps greater than Cape independence. Unfortunately, when Cape independence becomes such a pertinent issue, the country might be too far gone at that point.